Gabe, thank you so much for joining me today.
Zach, great to be with you.
Man, it is a blessing just to get the opportunity to just listen in and just hear a little bit more about the incredible mission and message that the Lord has placed on your heart to help people grow as thought leaders for such a time as this. But before we dive in and we unpack all the incredible things that you're doing, I have to mention up front here, we have a couple of things in common. We both attended LCA. Back in the day, it was Lynchburg Christian Academy. For me, it was Liberty Christian Academy, the feeder high school into Liberty University, where we got to attend, but we also both played quarterback. And then I have to ask this because, Gabe, my mom listens to every episode. So another thing we had in common is that we got to experience Julie Clinton as a teacher. You in the classroom, me within the home.
That's right.
I got to ask you so she can listen and laugh. What was Julie Clinton like as a sixth grade math teacher?
That's right. Sixth grade. I wasn't a big fan of math, but I will say I think I made it through the class. She was awesome. I mean, listen, I was 12 years old. I don't know. She must have been 20 years old. I mean, it was great. It was a great experience at Lynchburg Christian Academy at the time, and I actually got to tour that the other day, and I hadn't seen the new facilities. It was amazing to just see the school and all that's become and all the growth there. But yeah, I that's my claim to fame, that Julie Clinton taught me math.
What a safe and just a kind answer. My mom will be thrilled to hear that one from you, Gabe. That's right, though. You were recently at Liberty University. You spoke at Convocation. You did just an unbelievable job. It was so fun just to hear you, and I'm so blessed, just to be able to dive into a little bit more of what you're doing today. Gabe, for you personally, going to LCA, attending Liberty, I'm interested, when was it that God really implanted this idea just to develop thought leaders on your heart, and what has he kind of transformed it into today?
So for me, this vision really started to develop as I left Liberty. I went to work for John Maxwell for 5 years, who's a leadership author. Many, I'm sure, listeners have read his books, and I was greatly influenced by traveling the country with him as he taught leadership to pastors, to business leaders, people in the marketplace. But it was during that season that God really started to arrest my heart around my generation. I was in my 20s at the time, really walking away from the church. And I know as we continue to look at the data, we see that trek away from the church has consistently happened with this younger generation in our American culture. But I was so motivated to better understand what would leadership look like as it related to this generation, understanding their role as Christians in the culture. And I recognized that I had been missing this gap where I didn't understand that a Christian's responsibility in the world was essential to take up their post wherever they've been called, whether it's in government, media, education, politics. It could be a programmer, a technologist, a filmmaker, a documentarian, a singer, a filmmaker, right? It's like every single place that we've been called, if we bring the light of the gospel to that space, which brings people to truth, that helps redemption take place, then when we start to live in that way, it actually brings such meaning and purpose to our life and our calling. And we're less concerned about escaping the world and ultimately reaching our eternal destination. And we actually become really excited and enthusiastic about the role we have to play here. And it was through that I started to get very clear on my mission was to help more and more Christians really discover the breadth and the depth of how the Christian faith could play out in their life. And that led us to this point of creating all kinds of spaces, events, content designed to help train Christians to know how to be thought leaders in whatever area that they've been called to. And so we create content, events, experiences, and any number of podcasts and other things that just help equip Christians to know how to engage the cultural moment, to engage the conversations their friends are having, their kids are having, and to know how to do that with confidence that the Christian faith has something really positive and great to offer to that situation.
And Gabe, I love what you're saying in terms of just being able to dive into and equip Christians for such a time as this to engage the cultural moment that they may find themselves in. But really what you spent a lot of time doing was emphasizing trying to help people ask the right and the most effective questions. A lot of our listeners and viewers, they may be pretty familiar with Q ideas, where you really took this no topic is off limits approach and offer thoughtful guides to help individuals navigate the complex intersection of faith in 21st century culture. But recently, you've transitioned kind of away from Q ideas and now what you call Thinq Media, spelled Thinq. Gabe, I'm interested. Why the transition, but also what is Thinq Media all about?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, I mean, with same organization for 20 years, we've been gathering leaders to get them to think well about culture, and we called that Q Ideas, and it did stand for questions. We felt like creating space where people learned through asking questions. They weren't just told what to think, but they self-discovered it was a much more effective way for them to learn. And that just has played out as it's evolved over the last couple of years. We decided to be more clear about what we were doing. We didn't just want people to ask questions. We wanted them to think well. So we decided to change our brand to Thinq, and thinqmedia.com, spelled with a Q, like you said. And the Q stands for questions. In fact, each letter stands for something. So in the word think, T-H-I-N-Q, it actually embeds how to think. And so the T stands for theology. Like as a Christian, we start with God's view of any issue, of any matter. The H stands for history. We want to think well by understanding the history of events, also the history of ideas. There's very few new ideas under the sun, and when we take the time to understand where did this ideology come from, we can think well about it. The I stands for inquiry. It's another way of saying to be curious, to be people that want to learn about a subject and to learn from multiple sources. You don't just have to learn from Christians as a Christian to know how to think well about something. We can discover a lot from other people in our world who've done good work and scholarship on a variety of issues. The N then talks more to our posture, nuance. How do we communicate about these ideas? How do we persuade people towards the truth? Well, we do that by being sensitive to their story, understanding that a lot of the topics we're going to talk about are complex, and it takes a great deal of understanding and sensitivity and listening to know how to engage with someone. And so we want to be the kinds of people that represent that well. And then finally we get to the Q again, which when we think that way, we actually ask better questions than usually other people are asking about a particular topic. We ask deeper questions. We ask questions that really go to the human heart, that go to the human condition of how God designed us, but also the ways in which the enemy and sin has corrupted that, and ultimately to the hope of redemption and restoration through Christ. And so that led us to the new brand of Thinq, to say, let's help Christians in a time where there's lots of confusion.
Yes.
There's not always certainty of who you can trust. Be really clear. We don't want to just ask questions. We also want to help people know how to think well about matters that really are important today for Christians to know how to engage well.
As you're saying, Gabe, it almost comes across as like we live in a dog-eat-dog world out there where it's difficult to sometimes have these conversations, right, about these controversial issues and topics. People do whatever it takes, right, to get their point across, and it kind of brings a challenge where it rests in understanding that it's hard to, come let us reason together in such a time as this. So I'm interested just in all that you guys are doing with Thinq Media. What are some of those controversial topics, the ones that you're seeing kind of at the forefront of these conversations and these videos that you guys are kind of giving and offering so many people, but also how do we approach these kind of conversations in a more empathetic, but also, like you said, a more truth-filled way?
Yeah, well, a lot of the videos and content that we produce over the course of the year, it's over 100 different conversations that we host. Some of those are live at our in-person events. We do a culture summit every spring and a next gen summit in the fall that are all designed to pull leaders in a room and to hear over 30 different talks and conversations. And our talks are short, and I think, Zach, that's made it a little better for people to consume. We do 9-minute talks, and we actually time them. So when you're at an event, the clock's counting down.
Right.
The speaker only has 9 minutes, and it's usually on a really important topic to help us know how to think well about it. Some of them are a little bit longer. And then throughout the year, we're hosting interviews and conversations and creating podcasts, all designed to address current issues, to the point of what are the most controversial. I mean, it just feels like every week there's a new one, right?
That's
that
right.
You're trying to engage, as of late, I would say gender, that kind of confusing area of trying to understand gender and gender ideology, LGBTQ, those tend to rise to the top of the list for a lot of parents, a lot of church leaders, a lot of people who are trying to work through how does a Christian think well about this, but also base their thinking off of truth and off of biblical conviction and faithfulness, all the way to topics around, I would say, technology, artificial intelligence, mental health, something that you deal with all the time. The conversations essentially that the world's bringing to us, it's what the headlines might be speaking about on a daily basis. When you see a headline, I believe that Christians ought to have something thoughtful to add to that conversation. And so whatever you're reading in the headlines, we likely have produced and curated content around that subject. And we've tried to do it in a way, and sometimes it goes great. Sometimes maybe we leave that conversation going, I wish we could have done a little bit more. But the point is we're trying to bring, with humility, helpful conversations to the public square that help us think well about that topic and think about it biblically, historically, with curiosity, nuance, and ask better questions. And so we're doing that consistently, and I would say what we're finding is a lot of people are hungry for this. Like you said, a polarized world, things are very divisive. It's hard to find these spaces where people are having respectful conversations, even when they disagree sometimes. And we've been trying to create that kind of a space, I'd say, over the last 20 years. So that's given us a lot of, I would say, people that have just been faithful part of this community and consider us a place to come when they're trying to learn and go deeper into any number of subjects.
Gabe, it's fascinating because, as the holidays are quickly approaching, I can think of, several families even that, man, they can't even be in the same room. They can't even sit around the same table over dinner and having conversations like this, right? Especially when even politics, stuff like that, you throw that into the mix. And I mean, it becomes almost a battlefield or like a kind of like a ground zone of just war. And for those types of people, I'm interested, what's kind of the advice that you would give them and offer them as to how they can have, better conversations that are more enriching, where they're adding value. They're not just kind of critical toward one another. Maybe they're being more constructive. Maybe they're being more empathetic. How do they approach these conversations in a more beneficial way?
Well, I'd say the first thing is your perspective has to be set correctly, and that is that it's okay to debate ideas and not people, and be okay with that. Like, just think about it in that way. Like, most of the disagreements you have are about ideas. It's not with that person that's in your family that you love. They've heard an idea, they've believed an idea, they're promoting an idea, and you have a different idea. And when you can kind of frame it that way, like, look, I don't want to actually fight you, but can we just talk about the ideas that we're discussing? Sometimes that can kind of remove it from being so personal. And that's the challenge today. Our ideas have become our identity. And we really need to separate this, that our ideas are not our identity. And when we start to just assign identity to people based on an idea and one that we might go, well, that's a really bad idea that you believe, we actually dehumanize them. And it gives us less of an opportunity to engage, to influence, to persuade towards truth and towards really what they're looking for and what you're searching for, which is, how do we find what's actually true about this matter? In fact, help maybe to those who are listening as you head into the holidays, we have a guide called A Guide to Better Conversations that we make available at thinqmedia.com. So when you go to thinqmedia.com, and there's a free account you can create that is a thought leader account, we actually have a training that takes you through over 6 different 10-minute video sessions with me that walks through the THINQ, how to think. In addition, a PDF guide you could just print out, and I'd say before that Thanksgiving dinner, like, take a look at that, take a picture of it, like, use it as a cheat sheet of how to listen well, how to find common ground, how to make sure it's an enjoyable time with family, where you might not leave that dinner feeling like everybody agrees with you. Right. In fact, that would be impossible. But you could at least leave that dinner going, you know what, we had a really good time together. We had good conversation. I felt like we actually talked about things that matter, and we're able to do it in a way that honored one another versus put one another down.
I love what you said. Your ideas are not your identity. And I challenge all of our listeners and viewers, go and just take Gabe up on all of the valuable resources that Thinq Media are offering. I mean, they really are super beneficial. They'll help you with these conversations. They'll help you think better, listen better, as you said, and just engage in just these communications that you may have with several family members, especially over the holiday season. If you need it, go seek it, go and find it. But Gabe, what I would keep asking as we progress in the conversation is, we do, like you mentioned, truth sometimes does seem as if it was dying. Now, we know from a biblical perspective that truth can never die, right? Because truth, at the end of the day, truth's a person. It is found in Christ. But that doesn't mean that it's always embraced either, Gabe. And so in a world and country and society sometimes where it seems like a lot of good is being called evil and a lot of evil is being called good, at what line, right, do we kind of draw the line in terms of this biblical truth? As Jesus said, when do you shake the dust off your feet and kind of move on, and you stay true kind of to your standard and to yourself, and you don't even engage in some of those battles?
Yeah, and it really comes down, I think, Zach, to audience. I 100% agree. I mean, truth is truth, right? And Francis Schaeffer, you go back 60 years, he was like warning about this moment where truth would become so subjective and so relative that people's mental health would suffer because they would actually be being told lies that they knew were wrong.
Right.
I mean, you think about a child who's growing up in a world where they're told, no, you don't need to be a boy or a girl, or you can choose who you are and what your identity is. Like, you're telling a child actually a lie,
Right.
which means mentally they're going, wait, you're telling me that's true, but I know intuitively, like I know that is not true. You actually start to create disconnection. It starts to create schizophrenia. Like it starts to create true conditions for people psychologically when we don't tell the truth. So I think we're living in the moment that C.S. Lewis, that Francis Schaeffer, that others actually warned us about. But how do we live through it? If you're speaking to those who are within the faith and they claim to be Christians, and they're actually promoting things that are literally falsehoods and they're not true and they're not lies, then absolutely you shake the dust off after confronting, after trying to bring them back to repentance and to call them towards that. You do that, and then you keep moving forward. But to the non-believer, I don't know that we get the pass to ever check out and to suggest that we don't have to show up and continue to persuade, continue with compassion, with love, with kindness, draw out of them the depths of how they've been designed in the image of God. I believe those depths are in every human heart and soul, and I think of how Christ obviously never gave up on us. We shouldn't give up. It can be really hard work. It can take so much patience. But I think that diligence to just continue to show up and engage in these conversations about ideas with people and not hold it to them as this is something that's innate to them, but it's just an idea that they've been confronted with, and if God might use us to free them to see something that would be true, and if the Holy Spirit would grant that to them, then we want to be a part of that. And so it is difficult, and I will say it's getting more and more challenging. But what I'm encouraged about, Zach, and I know you're seeing this too, but the younger generation, there's such a hunger for truth. They're growing up in a world where there's so much that's they realize is fake and false, and they're growing up in a world of digital identity and so many things that aren't feeling real, and they're going, what is real? Will you help me understand reality? What is actually true? And so there is an opportunity developing to actually speak to them in terms that I would say for the last few generations, maybe that opportunity hasn't quite existed. And many of them don't already have a projection that they're putting to the church that says, hey, I don't want to hear about Christianity, or I've heard the gospel story so many times I'm writing you off. Many of them would say, actually, nobody's ever told me that story. And so there's a new opportunity if those of us who've been in the faith for a long time can see it and can operate with confidence in that kind of space.
I love what you're saying about the next gen, because like you said, they really are hungry for the truth. And I know you came and spoke at Liberty University in Convocation. You spoke about AI, artificial intelligence. You spoke about a lot of things in this world right now, Gabe. Let's be honest. I mean, they're fake. They're superficial. Speak to the importance in helping, especially the next gen, understand where their identity is found. It's found in authenticity. It's found in vulnerability, right? It's found in individuality. Can you help just kind of embrace that process and help the maybe next gen person listening today? Why is that so important?
Well, if you don't know where your identity is found, then you're very susceptible to other people to manipulate you into taking on their identity or the one that they would love for you to be a part of, right? And I think we live in a world that's constantly advertising different identities, different alignments, different ways that you can give your allegiance to, whether it's a product, a brand, a celebrity, a certain following on social media space, or for you to become something you're not, just to try to appease and reach people or get more followers. So there's a constant temptation towards something that's other than your true identity. And so the most attractive thing you can do as a young person is really wrestle with, who am I, and who was I created to be, and where did I come from? And these, Zach, are the age-old questions every human being asks. It doesn't matter what kind of age that we live in. We all go back to these core kind of worldview questions of like, where did I come from? What went wrong with the world? How do we fix it? And what is my meaning and my purpose? And the next gen is struggling perhaps more visibly than we've ever seen with this question of what is my meaning and purpose. We know the suicidality rate is up so high because they don't have deep meaning and purpose. And we can understand why. They're growing up in a world, again, that hasn't helped them form identity. Many of them have parents that have backed away from inculcating into them virtues and helping them understand, even from a faith perspective, what their faith teaches about who they ought to be. And they've kind of left it to others to do that, or left it to media or to the school system. And so we're in a really important moment to re-engage with this generation and to even think about our kids coming up under them who are in Gen Alpha that are still, their minds are still being developed, to recognize when we don't take the time to do that, then we actually leave a population very vulnerable to different people's manipulations and ultimately to people who go, I'm not sure I have meaning. I don't know that I need to be a part of this life. There was a recent survey talking to younger generation, and I'm not going to even quote the data. I'll just say what I intuited from it was that in the next generation, when asked, would you want to live to 100 years old, the majority said, why would I want to live to 100 years old? Like there was no interest in longevity of life.
Right.
And that only speaks to the fact that when they look at the older generation's lives or when they look at the state of this world, they're met with despair and they don't think it can change. And I think we want to be the kind of people that are incorporating hope and vision so that they understand, no, you're actually part of the change and you have a purpose, a deep meaning, you have a vocation to play out. God's got an assignment for you specifically on your life that's critical to what his plans are in the world. He doesn't have to use you, but he wants to use you. He wants to partner with you. And when we get on board with that, then young people, I find, come alive. They go, wow, I have meaning. I have purpose because that meaning's not connected to just looking in the mirror at myself and saying, hey, what do you feel like today? What do you want? But it's connected to this fixed point. It's God outside of ourselves who is the caller, and that's where we get the word calling. He actually is assigning us something, and he's calling us. And when we start to recognize as young people that we have a distinct calling in our life, that starts to provide that depth of meaning and purpose that I think catapults us through those moments where we're tempted towards meaninglessness.
I think that's so inevitable and important what you're just saying, because I work a lot with the next gen, and just being able to help them unlock or unleash the potential and the purpose that sometimes they kind of suppress within themselves because either they don't see it within themselves or someone or something has unfortunately maybe damaged that within them. So just being able, like you said, to call that out of them, it's so important. And it kind of brings us into the next question, which was, Ephesians 4:15 talks about that we're called to speak the truth in love, right? We do that to the next gen. We speak that truth overall, but then that prompts a big question, which comes down to, does truth trump love or does love trump truth? A lot of people don't understand that battle, Gabe. And so when we're talking about truth and love, sometimes even you see it in culture and society, you see it in the next gen all the time. We weaponize this fact that our feelings trump all else. Sometimes the truth can just be flat out hard, though, Gabe. What is kind of your word or your messaging in terms of that conversation?
Well, a good friend of mine who's a PGA golfer, okay, and I love golf, and he's helped me a little bit, but man, I've got a lot further to go. But he's won tournaments, and so I'll say that I'm not gonna give his name, but what he said to me, he goes, feelings are real, they're just not reliable. Yeah. And he likened it to the fact that he had won golf tournaments with a golf swing. Those of you who play golf, that never felt right to him. He's like, I'm swinging, I'm doing the right mechanic, it feels so weird. But I won golf tournaments. And then I've lost way more golf tournaments where it felt great. Yeah. But the ball was not going where I intended it to go. And his point was, as it relates to us, is that we're all going to have feelings that are important. Our emotions are important. But we live in a world that's actually, emotivism's the term that's assigned to this idea that we know truth through our emotion. And this is a dangerous place to be in because we don't actually know truth through our emotion. We know truth, especially as Christians. We understand we know truth through the revelation of God, as we've seen through his scriptures. And when we start to think that we know the truth, or your truth and my truth are just different truths, we start to realize that this is all a house of cards, that there can only be one truth. And we're all trying to understand what is actually true. And until we can identify what that is, then we are a bit lost in trying to keep up with the latest feelings and what people want to feel good about. And so I think the danger of not being clear on what you know to be true and it not being conviction that's rooted in Scripture is we are tossed with kind of the waves of the times and wherever the wind's blowing, and whatever our friends are excited about or what people are compassionate about or however they're expressing what they believe to be wrong in the world can actually get very misguided. And when we actually base it on truth and what we see in Scripture, now our emotions will align with what that is, which means to be people of compassion and love and gentleness as we approach people that, again, have different ideas that they've believed, but we can still be compassionate to them. But I also think we understand that we can hold to our convictions, and that when we do that, that's actually going to produce a way better conversation and a really a better testimony for what it means as Christians.
It's a great word. Feelings are real. They're just not reliable. I've also heard that feelings are great indicators. They're just horrible dictators, right? So it's just
That's great.
identifying those two truths right there. As we kind of are wrapping this up, it reminds me of a story in Scripture, 1 Kings chapter 3, where Solomon was in a sense given like that one wish from God in that dream, where it was like, Solomon, if you could have anything, what would you take? What do you want? Rather than the fame and the fortune, he comes from a difficult home life. He could have asked for, just his family to be brought together. He asked for one thing. This is what he asked for: an understanding mind to govern the Lord's people, that he may discern between good and evil. In other words, he asked for wisdom. Gabe, how does a listener out there today who maybe isn't just given a wish, right, to say, like, make me a wise person, how do we begin taking steps toward becoming a man or woman of wisdom and discernment?
Yeah, well, it's such a great question. I mean, and I think it ties back to what you were just saying about truth. We're in a world that fights over truth. And, the thing that I realize is you can have truth, but not always wisdom, because wisdom's the application of truth to that moment.
Yeah.
But you can't have biblical wisdom without truth. And so this pursuit of wisdom is a big deal. The reason Solomon asked for it, and the reason we sit back and go, man, we can actually read through the Proverbs and learn and cultivate an understanding of wisdom, is God wanted us to be people that lived with a different perspective. Our world has so much more information today than it's ever had, but we actually lack wisdom. So this pursuit of wisdom is important. And I would encourage people, read through Proverbs. You will see so many declarations of what it means to be a person of wisdom, but then ultimately ask the Lord for wisdom, because like you said, he gives it freely to all who ask. So let's ask for it. Let's actually see how the proficiency of having biblical and godly wisdom in a season where there's so much chaos and confusion will actually be a way in which God may use you to lift you up, to actually give you a position of authority in a room. Maybe it's amongst your friends. Maybe it's those who are questioning all kinds of things or living in fear. When you walk in and have wisdom instead of fear, you actually bring life to the community that you've been called to lead and to steward. And so I think it's an excellent thing for us to pursue. It's an incredible pursuit, and it's amazing more that God says he wants to give it to us freely. All we have to do is ask.
That's right. Seek truth and ask for wisdom. Gabe, as we wrap up, I want to ask you this, because I know the Next Gen Summit, it's coming up November 10th and 11th right there in Nashville, Tennessee, right where you guys live. Who are some of the speakers? What's it all about? Who can join? I just want our listeners and viewers to understand what's going on.
Yeah. Thank you, Zach. Well, this is our first one. So it's the inaugural Next Gen Summit, and
Let's
we
go.
have over 30 different presenters that are coming, and they're doing this format, 9-minute talks mostly. There's a couple 18-minute conversations, and it's people like Matt Chandler and David Platt, all the way to several voices that I would encourage you to go look at the topics on the website that are talking about issues like video games, like mental health, like what it looks like for us to be people who understand what it means to be in a world of lots of depression in the next generation. We've got all kinds of different subjects that, for us, the way we select speakers for our summits is we find a topic and we go, who is the most educated, most important thought leader that could help us understand that topic better? And then we invite them. But it's not just about content, because we all get a lot of content these days. It's about the experiences. It's about meeting other leaders who are in their 20s, early 30s, who are pursuing the vision God's put on their life. And it's starting to create relationships around people in every area of culture, media, entertainment, politics, you name it. These leaders are coming in from all over, and they're bright. They're doing amazing things in the world. Many times feel alone, and they come to a summit like this with 1,000 other young leaders, and they go, I'm not alone. There's a movement happening of Christians in my generation who are taking this out to the world. And so we create all kinds of fun experiences, Q&As, breakouts, after parties. But everybody can go to nextgensummit.com, nxtgensummit.com, and see all about it. And we would love to have you here in the next few days come be a part of it and help us celebrate a new generation.
nextgensummit.com. I challenge all of our listeners, go register today. It's going to be an incredible event. Gabe Lyons, I just cannot thank you enough again for all the incredible work that you're doing, for the friendship of you and Rebecca and your family, to all of us here at the American Association of Christian Counselors. We love and appreciate you, sir.
Thank you, Zach.